On Father's Day, my daughter Maya handed me a crumpled gift bag with $15 socks inside, her smile as hollow as a politician's promise. That same evening, scrolling through social media while nursing my wounded pride, I discovered a $20,000 diamond necklace around her mother-in-law's neck, purchased with my credit card, which Maya had claimed was for urgent medical expenses. 23 frantic calls later, her voice breaking through my voicemail like shards of glass. "Papa, please don't do this. I'm begging you, don't destroy everything we have." But the wheels were already in motion, grinding forward with the inevitability of justice too long delayed. There was no turning back from the path I'd chosen. No mercy left in a heart that had given everything and received nothing but lies in return. Before we dive deeper into this story of betrayal and redemption, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything to me, and it helps me continue sharing these powerful stories of human resilience. The June afternoon sun blazed through my living room windows like an interrogation lamp, casting harsh, unforgiving shadows across the threadbare carpet where I sat, hands folded in my lap like a penitent, waiting for absolution that would never come. Maya had promised something special for Father's Day. Her exact words, delivered with that practiced smile I'd learned to recognize but refused to acknowledge, were, "Something that'll blow your mind, Papa. Something that shows how much you really mean to me." Despite 18 years of broken promises, forgotten birthdays, and the slow, systematic erosion of my dreams in service of hers, something foolish and pathetic inside me still hoped. Still believed that somewhere beneath the designer clothes and entitled attitude lived my little girl, the one who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms and whisper that she'd always love me more than anyone else in the whole world. The grandfather clock in the corner, a wedding gift from my late parents, one of the few things I'd refused to sell during Maya's expensive college years, ticked with mechanical precision, each second echoing in the silence like a countdown to disappointment. Tick. Another moment of my life spent waiting for scraps of affection from the daughter I'd raised alone. Tick. Another breath drawn in a house that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. Tick. Another heartbeat in a chest that had been breaking so slowly I'd stopped noticing the pain. The house still smelled of the lemon oil I used every Sunday morning, a ritual I'd maintained since Maya was small. She used to help me polish the furniture, her tiny hands leaving streaks I'd secretly refused to clean because they were hers, because they proved she'd been there, that we'd shared something beautiful together. Now the scent just reminded me of all the Sundays she'd found excuses not to visit, all the holidays she'd spent with Derek's family instead of mine. Family photographs lined the mantelpiece like tombstones to better times, each frame a monument to the man I used to be, and the relationship I'd thought we shared. Maya at 3, gap-toothed and giggling on my shoulders at the zoo, both of us covered in cotton candy and pure joy. Maya at 16, rolling her eyes but secretly pleased as I insisted on taking prom photos, her dress paid for with overtime shifts I'd volunteered for without complaint. Maya at her wedding last year, radiant in white silk while I handed over the check that emptied my retirement fund, whispering, "For my princess," as I kissed her forehead and tried not to think about the Italian vacation I'd dreamed of since I was 25. Now that Princess felt more like a stranger wearing my daughter's face, speaking with my daughter's voice but carrying none of my daughter's heart. When had she changed? When had love become transaction, family become obligation, and me become nothing more than an ATM with feelings that inconveniently needed managing? The doorbell's chime jolted me from my reverie like a gunshot, my chest tightening with that familiar mix of hope and dread that had become my default emotional state whenever Maya graced me with her presence. I opened the door to find her standing there, her designer purse clutched tight against her body like armor, her husband Derek lurking behind her like a shadow that had learned to wear expensive clothes. Maya's once wild curls, the ones she'd inherited from her mother, the ones I used to brush every morning before school, were now straightened into submission, processed and tamed like everything else wild and genuine about her. Her natural warmth, the light that used to dance in her eyes when she saw me, had been replaced by something calculated, sharp-edged, as cold and perfect as the diamonds she'd taken to wearing. "Happy Father's Day, Papa," she said, thrusting a wrinkled gift bag toward me with all the enthusiasm of someone paying a parking ticket. Her smile was practiced, professional, the kind you see on salespeople pushing extended warranties or politicians making campaign promises they never intended to keep. Behind her, Derek checked his phone with the bored impatience of a man who had somewhere more important to be, his $1,000 sneakers tapping against my worn welcome mat like a timer, counting down to his escape. I accepted the bag, its lightness immediately telling a story I didn't want to read. The tissue paper was crumpled, obviously recycled from some other gift, some other occasion when presentation had mattered enough to warrant fresh wrapping. Maya and Derek exchanged a glance, quick, furtive, loaded with meaning I couldn't yet decipher, but somehow knew would hurt me. The kind of look shared by conspirators, by people who'd discussed how to handle the papa situation over morning coffee, and decided on the minimum effective dose of attention. "Thanks, sweetheart," I managed, my voice steady despite the growing knot in my stomach, the familiar ache of disappointment that had become as much a part of Father's Day as barbecues and bad ties. "Come in, both of you. I made that lemonade you used to love." We moved to the living room in that familiar dance of family obligation, steps choreographed by years of performing affection neither of us felt anymore. Maya perched on the edge of the couch like a bird ready to take flight at the first sign of genuine emotion, while Derek sprawled in my favorite chair, the one that had molded to my body over 15 years of solitary evenings, the one where I'd held Maya through countless childhood nightmares and homework sessions and heart-to-heart talks about boys and dreams and the future that stretched before us like an open road. The grandfather clock's ticking seemed to grow louder in the silence, marking time like a judge's gavel, like a heartbeat, like the countdown to an execution I could feel approaching but couldn't prevent. The room that had once been filled with laughter and warmth now felt like a stage set, artificial and cold, decorated with the props of a happy family, but empty of the substance that made those props meaningful. Inside the bag, wrapped in tissue paper that whispered of afterthought and obligation, a pair of generic black socks still bearing their $14.99 price tag like a slap across my face. The kind you'd grab from a gas station clearance bin when you suddenly remembered you needed a gift and couldn't be bothered to put thought or effort into the gesture. I held them up, the silence stretching between us like a chasm, like the distance between the father I'd tried to be and the ATM I'd apparently become. "Socks," I said, forcing brightness into my voice the way you force a smile for a photograph you don't want to be in. "Very practical." The word tasted bitter on my tongue, a euphemism for cheap, for thoughtless, for the kind of gift you give to someone whose feelings don't matter enough to consider. Maya's laugh was too high, too quick, like glass breaking. "Exactly." I thought, what does Papa really need? Something useful, right? Not like those expensive gifts that just collect dust. Her words hit like tiny needles, each one drawing blood, each one designed to justify the unjustifiable while making me feel guilty for expecting more. Behind her, Derek smirked, and I caught the glint of something cruel in his eyes, the look of a man watching someone else's humiliation and finding it entertaining. I folded the socks carefully, buying time to process the magnitude of this moment, the weight of what $14.99 represented. Not the money. God knows I'd spent more than that on lunch without thinking twice. But what it said about how my daughter saw me, valued me, thought about me when I wasn't there to witness her calculations. $14.99. For the man who'd worked double shifts to pay for her college, who'd sold his motorcycle to afford her wedding dress, who'd given up his dreams of traveling to ensure she never wanted for anything. For the man who'd held her hair back when she was sick, who'd stayed up all night teaching her to drive, who'd cried at her graduation because he was so proud of the woman she'd become. $14.99 was apparently what all of that was worth to her now. "You staying for dinner?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Could read it in the way Maya was already gathering her purse, in the way Derek was already standing and checking his watch like a man with important places to be, and important people to see. "Actually, we're having dinner with Victoria," Maya said, mentioning Derek's mother with the kind of reverence usually reserved for royalty or saints or people who'd never asked her to consider anyone's feelings but her own. "You know how she loves to celebrate everything big. She's always doing these elaborate family gatherings, making sure everyone feels special and appreciated." The comparison was subtle, but devastating. A knife slipped between my ribs with surgical precision. Victoria, who made everyone feel special? Unlike me, who apparently couldn't manage to deserve more than gas station socks and a 5-minute visit squeezed between more important obligations. They were gone within minutes, leaving behind only the lingering scent of Maya's expensive perfume, something French and complex that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and the echo of their rushed goodbye. I sat alone with my socks, the grandfather clocks ticking, now a hammer beating against my skull. Each second a reminder of time wasted, love squandered, chances lost to pride and stubbornness, and the belief that blood meant something more than shared DNA. That evening, I found myself scrolling through social media with the desperate hunger of a man looking for proof that he still mattered to someone, somewhere. It was a habit I'd developed to feel connected to Maya's life since she'd grown distant, since her visits had become obligations and her calls had become requests for money disguised as conversations about her life. Her latest post, uploaded just 30 minutes ago, stopped my heart cold and left me staring at the screen like a man witnessing his own execution. A photo from Romano's, the most expensive restaurant in the city, Derek's mother Victoria beaming at the camera with the satisfied glow of a woman who'd never had to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. Around her neck, catching the candlelight like captured stars, was a diamond necklace that looked like it belonged in a museum or a safe, something so exquisite and valuable that it made my gas station socks look like the insult they were. The caption read, "Celebrating the most amazing mother-in-law with a gift that shows how much we treasure her. Victoria deserves only the best, and tonight she's wearing a piece that reflects how much she means to our family. Family. Love. Diamond. Necklace. Blessed. Grateful." My hands trembled as I zoomed in on the image, my phone screen blurring as my eyes filled with tears I refused to let fall. The necklace was exquisite, clearly custom-made, clearly expensive beyond any reasonable measure, clearly new. The diamonds caught the restaurant's ambient lighting and threw it back in brilliant flashes, each stone perfectly cut, perfectly placed, perfect in a way that suggested no expense had been spared in its creation. My mind raced back to 2 months ago, Maya's panicked phone call at 2:17 a.m. that had jolted me from the deepest sleep I'd managed in weeks. Her voice had been raw with tears, shaking with what I'd believed was genuine terror and desperation. "Papa, I need $20,000. It's an emergency. Derek's having some serious medical issues and the insurance won't cover the experimental treatment he needs. The doctors say if we don't move fast, if we don't get him into this program immediately, he could... Papa, I can't lose him. Please, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't literally life or death." I'd wired the money that same night, stumbling to my computer in my pajamas and slippers, liquidating my emergency fund without hesitation because my daughter needed me, because someone I loved was in danger, because that's what fathers do when their children call crying in the middle of the night. I'd transferred every penny I had in savings, money I'd been putting aside for years in case of medical emergencies or car repairs, or the 1,000 small disasters that can destroy a man living paycheck to paycheck. $20,000. My entire safety net, gone in a single electronic transfer because I'd believed in my daughter's tears, in her fear, in her love for the man she'd married. Or so I'd thought. The room spun slightly as the pieces clicked into place, with the terrible clarity of a puzzle solving itself. Derek looked perfectly healthy in the photo, raising a champagne glass with steady hands, his smile broad and confident, his complexion glowing with the health of a man who'd never been sick a day in his privileged life. No medical crisis, no emergency treatment, no desperate race against time to save his life. Just a $20,000 necklace for his mother while I got $14 socks and a performance of gratitude so convincing, I'd almost believed it myself. I screenshotted the image, my finger shaking as I tapped the screen, collecting evidence of my own daughter's betrayal like a detective documenting a crime scene. The timestamp showed the post had been uploaded at 8:47 p.m., just hours after she'd left my house with her cheap gift and cheaper smile. Hours after she'd sat in my living room and accepted my gratitude for socks that cost less than her lunch, knowing she'd spent my life savings on jewelry for another woman. The grandfather clock chimed midnight, its deep tones reverberating through my chest like a funeral bell, like the death knell of whatever naive faith I'd been clinging to about my daughter's character. Each chime was a year of her life, each tone a memory of sacrifice and love and the slow, steady erosion of my own dreams in service of hers. Sleep didn't come that night. I sat at my kitchen table, the screenshot glowing on my phone screen like evidence of my own stupidity, my mind cycling through every memory, every sacrifice, every moment I'd chosen Maya's happiness over my own well-being. The coffee grew cold in my cup as I remembered selling my father's watch to pay for her spring break trip to Cancun. The lemon oil smell that usually comforted me now seemed cloying, suffocating, a reminder of all the Sunday mornings I'd spent alone while she found better ways to spend her time. By dawn, something fundamental had shifted inside me, like tectonic plates moving deep beneath the earth's surface. The father who would have made excuses for Maya, who would have found ways to justify her actions and blame himself for expecting too much, was gone. In his place sat a man who'd finally seen the truth, raw and unfiltered and undeniable. I hadn't raised a daughter. I'd raised a beautiful, charming predator who'd learned to weaponize my love against me, who'd turned my devotion into a weakness she could exploit whenever she needed funding for her lifestyle. The grandfather clock ticked on, but now each second sounded like progress, not loss. Like footsteps on a path toward something I couldn't yet see but knew I needed to find. Time to stop being the victim of my own generosity. Time to stop enabling the monster I'd helped create. Time to discover what kind of man I could be when I wasn't being bled dry by someone who saw my love as an unlimited credit line. Maya's first call came at 7:43 a.m., the phone's shrill ring cutting through the morning silence like a blade through silk. Then 7:45. Then 7:47. By noon, she'd called 31 times. Each missed call another nail in the coffin of our relationship. Each ignored ring another step toward a freedom I'd never dared imagine. I let them all go to voicemail, her increasingly frantic messages painting a picture of desperation that I'd caused but didn't regret. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I was the one with power in our relationship. I was the one who could choose when and if to respond. I was the one holding the cards she needed to see. "Papa, why aren't you answering? I know you're upset about something, but we can talk about it like adults, like the family we've always been. Please, just pick up the phone so we can work this out." The first message was confident, controlled, the voice of someone accustomed to managing my emotions and steering conversations toward outcomes that benefited her. She still believed she could charm her way out of whatever had made me withdraw, still thought the right combination of sweet words and manipulative affection could reset our dynamic to its usual pattern of her taking and me giving. "Papa, Derek says you're being dramatic about something, but he doesn't understand our relationship like I do. I know you love me and I love you too. That's why this silence is so unlike you. Just call me back, okay? Let me explain whatever it is you think is wrong." The second message revealed the first crack in her confidence. Derek's dismissal of my feelings, his casual reduction of my pain to drama, showed me exactly how they discussed me in private. I was a problem to be managed, an emotional burden to be handled, not a person whose feelings mattered enough to consider seriously. "Papa, I'm getting worried now. This isn't like you to just disappear, to ignore my calls like this. Did something happen? Are you sick? Are you hurt? Please just send me a text so I know you're okay. Even if you're mad at me for some reason, I need to know you're safe." By the fifth call, genuine panic was creeping into her voice. Maya was many things, selfish, manipulative, entitled, but she wasn't stupid. She could feel the shift in our dynamic. could sense that something fundamental had changed in the careful balance of power she'd spent years establishing. The silence itself was a message, and she was finally learning to read it. "Papa, I've been thinking about our visit yesterday, trying to figure out what I did wrong. What made you upset? Was it the socks? I know they weren't expensive, but I thought you'd appreciate something practical. You always taught me not to waste money on flashy things. I was trying to honor what you taught me about values and simplicity." The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. She was attempting to reframe her insult as a tribute to my teachings, to make me feel guilty for being hurt by her calculated indifference. Even in crisis, she couldn't resist trying to control the narrative, to make herself the thoughtful daughter and me the unreasonable father who couldn't appreciate her wisdom. "Papa, please. I know you're listening to these messages. I know you're choosing not to answer, and that scares me more than anything. We've never gone this long without talking. Even when I was in college, even when I was busy with my own life, we always stayed connected. Don't let whatever this is destroy what we have." What we have. As if our relationship had been mutual. As if I'd been receiving as much as I'd been giving. As if love was something that flowed both ways between us, instead of a one-way stream from my heart to her bank account. The delusion was staggering. Or perhaps it wasn't delusion at all, but simply the logic of someone who'd never had to consider another person's needs as real or important. The final voicemail came at 11:47 p.m., her voice raw and broken in a way I'd only heard once before. The night her mother left us when she was 7 years old and the world had suddenly become a place where people you loved could simply vanish without explanation. "Papa, I know you saw the post. I know you figured it out, and I know you're furious with me. But you don't understand the whole story. You don't know the pressure I'm under, the expectations I have to meet. Victoria needed that necklace for her charity gala next month. It was about respect, about family image, about showing Derek's family that I can contribute something meaningful to their world. I was going to tell you about it, I swear I was. I just needed time to figure out how to explain it in a way that wouldn't hurt you." Even in her most vulnerable moment, Maya couldn't resist trying to justify the unjustifiable, to make her theft sound like sacrifice, her lies sound like protection, the charity gala, the family image, the pressure to contribute, all of it designed to make me feel sorry for her, to make me see myself as the obstacle to her happiness rather than the victim of her betrayal. "Please don't do whatever you're planning. I can hear it in the silence, I can feel it in the way you're pulling away. I know that look you get when you've made up your mind about something, even though I can't see your face. Papa, please. I'm still your little girl, somewhere underneath all this mess. Don't give up on me. Don't give up on us." But she wasn't my little girl anymore. She was a woman who'd calculated exactly how much my love was worth, then sold it for jewelry and social status and the approval of people who would never love her the way I had. She was a stranger who happened to share my DNA, who'd learned to mimic the words and gestures of affection while feeling none of the substance behind them. I deleted every voicemail without finishing them, each swipe of my finger a small act of rebellion against years of emotional manipulation. The silence that followed was the most peaceful I'd felt in years, the absence of her voice a presence all its own. For the first time since she'd learned to talk, Maya's words had no power over me. I was finally, blissfully, free from the exhausting work of pretending her cruelty was love. Rebecca Martinez had the kind of office that inspired confidence. Floor-to-ceiling law books that looked actually read rather than decorative. Diplomas from prestigious universities hung without pretension between family photos. Awards for pro bono work scattered among personal mementos like evidence of a life lived in service to something larger than profit. She listened to my story without judgment, her dark eyes sharp with intelligence and something else I hadn't expected: recognition. She'd seen this before, heard this story in different voices with different details, but the same heartbreaking core of family betrayal. "How long has this been going on?" she asked, reviewing the bank statements I'd printed out and organized with the obsessive care of a man building a case against his own child. Each transfer to Maya was highlighted in yellow like evidence at a crime scene, each lie documented and dated and cross-referenced with the stories she'd told to justify them. The pattern goes back about 2 years, I said, my voice steady despite the weight of what I was revealing. 20,000 last month for Derek's medical emergency that turned into a necklace. 15,000 in March for her car accident that I now realize coincided with their vacation to the Bahamas. 12,000 in January for Derek's business investment that funded God knows what luxury. I paused, watching Rebecca's expression grow more serious as she processed the scope of Maya's deception. Looking back with clear eyes, I can see the escalation. It started small, a few hundred here and there for emergencies that never quite made sense. But once she realized I wouldn't question her stories, the amounts got bigger and the lies got more elaborate. Rebecca leaned back in her leather chair, her fingers steepled in a gesture that suggested deep thought rather than judgment. "And you verified none of these expenses?" "She's my daughter," I said, the words sounding weak even to me. The defense of a man who'd confused love with enablement for so many years he'd forgotten the difference. I trusted her. When someone you've raised from birth calls you crying about emergencies, you don't demand proof, you help. That's what family does. "That trust is exactly what she's been exploiting," Rebecca said, her voice gentle but firm, cutting through my self-justification with surgical precision. "This is financial elder abuse, Mr. Thompson. The fact that she's family doesn't change that legal reality. If anything, it makes it worse. She's used your love as a weapon against you." The phrase hit me like a physical blow, each word landing with the weight of truth I'd been avoiding for years. Financial elder abuse. My own daughter. The woman I'd raised to be honest and compassionate and strong had become someone who preyed on my affection, who saw my generosity as weakness to be exploited rather than love to be cherished. The room seemed to shrink around me as the full scope of Maya's betrayal crystallized into legal terminology. This wasn't just lying or selfishness or the thoughtless cruelty of someone too immature to consider others' feelings. This was systematic exploitation, calculated and sustained and targeted at the person who'd loved her most. "What are my options?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, the question feeling like a betrayal of every instinct I'd developed over 28 years of fatherhood. Rebecca opened a file folder, her movements precise and professional, the actions of someone who'd guided other parents through this exact conversation, who understood the unique agony of having to choose between justice and the illusion of family harmony. "First, we freeze her access to your accounts immediately," she said, consulting notes that suggested she'd already been thinking about this case, already developing a strategy. "Then we document everything, every transfer, every lie, every manipulation. We build a timeline that shows the pattern of abuse, the escalation, the systematic nature of what she's been doing to you." She looked up from her notes, her expression serious but not unkind. "If you want to pursue criminal charges, we have grounds for fraud, theft, elder abuse, the amounts involved, the duration of the pattern, the relationship of trust she violated. All of that works in our favor if we decide to take this to court." Criminal charges. Against Maya, the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who made me Father's Day cards from construction paper and glitter, who once wrote an essay about how I was her hero. My heart shattered and hardened simultaneously, the pain transmuting into something colder, more durable, more focused on justice than mercy. What would that mean for her? I asked, needing to understand the full weight of the decision I was contemplating. Given the amounts involved and the pattern of behavior, we're looking at potentially serious consequences, Rebecca said, not sugarcoating the reality. Fraud charges could result in significant fines, restitution orders, possibly jail time depending on the judge and her criminal history. The elder abuse enhancement could make the penalties even more severe. Jail time. Maya in an orange jumpsuit, her perfect manicure chipped, her entitled smile finally wiped away by the reality of consequences she'd never had to face. The image should have horrified me, should have triggered every protective instinct I'd developed during her childhood. Instead, I felt a cold satisfaction, a sense that the universe might finally be restored to some kind of balance. "I need to think about this," I said, though even as I spoke the words, I could feel my decision crystallizing like ice forming on a window. The thinking was already done, had been done the moment I saw that necklace, the moment I understood how completely she'd played me. Of course, Rebecca said, closing the folder with a soft snap that sounded like a door closing on one chapter of my life and opening on another. But don't take too long. The sooner we move, the stronger our case will be. And Mr. Thompson? She looked at me directly, her eyes kind but firm. You're not doing this to her. She did this to herself. You're just refusing to continue enabling it. As I left her office, walking out into the bright afternoon sunlight that seemed too cheerful for the gravity of what I was contemplating, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The possibility of a future that belonged to me, rather than to Maya's endless needs and demands. The grandfather clock in my mind ticked forward, not toward loss, but toward liberation, toward a life where my love wouldn't be used as currency in someone else's game. The bank's marble floor gleamed under fluorescent lights that hummed with the cold efficiency of institutional power, its chill seeping through my shoes as I stood at the customer service counter with a folder full of documentation and a heart full of resolve that surprised me with its steadiness. The air buzzed with the low drone of air conditioning and whispered conversations, sharp against the warmth of the June afternoon I'd left outside. In my hand, forms to block Maya's access to my credit cards and accounts, their lines stark and final. Legal language that would transform our relationship from mutual dependence to complete separation with the stroke of a pen. My signature hovered over the papers, the weight of 28 years, her laughter, her tears, my sacrifices, her betrayals, pressing against the decision like ghosts demanding recognition. But the Rolex's glint from that social media post, her sneering dismissal of my feelings as drama, the gas station socks that represented the sum total of my worth in her eyes, all of it drowned out whatever hesitation remained. I signed each form with careful deliberation, the scratch of ink on paper a small but defiant act of self-preservation. The bank manager, Mrs. Patterson, was a thin woman with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of professional sympathy that suggested she'd seen this exact scenario played out in her office before. She reviewed each form with meticulous care, her expression neutral but her eyes occasionally flicking to my face as if she was trying to read the story behind the paperwork. "This will take effect immediately," she said, her voice clipped and professional but not unkind. "All cards and account access under Maya Thompson's name will be blocked within the hour. She'll receive notification via text and email that her access has been suspended due to account holder request." She paused, looking at me directly for the first time since I'd sat down. "I have to ask, Mr. Thompson, are you sure about this? Once we implement these restrictions, they can only be reversed by you personally, with proper identification and documentation. Your daughter won't be able to appeal or override these decisions." "I'm sure," I said, my voice steady and clear, surprising myself with how certain I sounded. The doubt I'd expected to feel, the guilt that had governed so many of my decisions regarding Maya, was nowhere to be found. Instead, there was only a calm certainty that I was finally, after years of being victimized by my own generosity, taking control of my own life. Mrs. Patterson nodded, making notes in my file. "The notifications will go out within the hour. Is there anything else we can do for you today?" I thought about mentioning the fraud, the systematic theft Maya had perpetrated over the past 2 years, but decided to save that conversation for when Rebecca and I were ready to file formal charges. Today was about stopping the bleeding. Tomorrow would be about seeking justice. "That's everything for now," I said, gathering my copies of the paperwork with hands that remained remarkably steady. "Thank you for your help." As I left the bank, the glass doors hissing shut behind me with a sound like finality itself, I stepped into the Chicago afternoon heat and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The simple pleasure of knowing that my money was mine again, that the accounts I'd spent decades building were no longer being used to fund someone else's lies. I drove to a nearby coffee shop where I'd arranged to meet Rebecca, the familiar streets of my neighborhood looking somehow different, brighter, as if I was seeing them clearly for the first time in years. The weight of constant financial anxiety, the fear that Maya's next emergency would wipe out what little security I'd managed to build, was gone, replaced by something light and warm and entirely unfamiliar. Hope. The coffee shop was busy with the afternoon rush, filled with the kind of ambient noise that made private conversations possible. Rebecca was already there when I arrived, her laptop open, a half-eaten scone on a plate beside her, papers spread across the table in organized chaos that suggested she'd been working on my case since our meeting that morning. "Well?" she asked, as I slid into the booth across from her, raising an eyebrow with an expression that was part professional interest and part personal investment in my well-being. "Did you pull the plug?" "Signed and sealed," I said, unable to suppress the small smile that tugged at my lips as I spoke. The words felt good, solid, like a door locking shut on a chapter of my life I was ready to close. "She's completely cut off from my accounts. No more access to my credit cards, no more unauthorized transfers, no more funding her lifestyle while she hands me gas station socks." Rebecca grinned, leaning back in her chair with the satisfied expression of someone who'd seen justice served. "I bet she'll love that even more than those socks you got. Nothing says Happy Father's Day like having your personal ATM suddenly start requiring actual authorization." Her humor was sharp but not cruel, and I found myself laughing, actually laughing for the first time in weeks. The sound felt rusty, unfamiliar, like an instrument I'd forgotten how to play but was slowly remembering. "Your daughter's about to learn what a truly practical gift looks like," Rebecca continued, tapping her laptop screen. "Independence. Self-reliance, the radical concept that adults pay for their own designer jewelry." She pulled up a spreadsheet that made my stomach clench even as it validated my decision. "I've been digging deeper into your financial records, cross-referencing Maya's emergencies with social media posts, travel records, purchase patterns. The picture that emerges is comprehensive." I leaned forward, studying the data she'd compiled. Each line item was a betrayal, each category a different lie Maya had told to separate me from my money. Medical emergencies that coincided with luxury purchases, car repairs that matched the dates of expensive vacations, business investments that funded designer handbags and restaurant bills at places I couldn't afford to eat. "The total is staggering," Rebecca said, her voice losing its earlier humor as the scope of Maya's theft became clear. $127,000 over 24 months. That's not just a daughter with expensive taste. That's systematic financial abuse conducted with the precision of a professional con artist. $127,000. More than my annual salary. More than my parents' entire life insurance policy that I'd saved for emergencies like medical bills or major home repairs. Gone. Converted into a lifestyle I'd funded but was never invited to share. Transformed into social media posts that painted Maya as successful and generous while I sat alone in my house, polishing furniture with lemon oil and wondering why I felt so empty. "This changes the conversation entirely," Rebecca continued, her finger tracing the timeline of Maya's deception. "We're not talking about a few impulsive purchases or poor judgment calls. This is organized crime committed by someone who understood exactly what she was doing and chose to do it anyway." She looked up from the laptop, her expression serious. "The pattern shows escalation, sophistication, and most damaging of all, premeditation. Maya didn't stumble into stealing from you. She developed a system for it." My coffee grew cold as I stared at the numbers, each figure representing not just money but trust betrayed, love exploited. Years of my life spent working to fund someone else's fantasy of success. The weight of it should have crushed me, but instead, I felt strangely liberated. The truth, however painful, was better than the lies I'd been living with. "What happens next?" I asked. Rebecca closed the laptop with a soft click that sounded like a decision being made. "Now we wait for Maya to discover her new reality, and based on my experience with cases like this, we won't have to wait long." I was in the produce section of the grocery store, weighing tomatoes with the simple pleasure of knowing I was buying them for myself rather than funding someone else's lies, when Maya's world collapsed around her. The call came at 2:47 p.m., Rebecca's name flashing on my screen with the urgency of breaking news. "It's done," she said without preamble, her voice carrying the satisfaction of a chess player who'd just executed a long-planned strategy. "Maya tried to use your card 15 minutes ago for a $600 purchase at Bellissima Boutique downtown. Declined. She's tried 4 more times since then, each attempt more frantic than the last." I set down the tomatoes, my hands steady despite the magnitude of what was happening. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one scrambling to fix Maya's problems. I was the one creating them. The reversal felt strange, powerful, overdue. "How do you know all this?" I asked, though part of me was already anticipating the answer. "The bank called me directly," Rebecca explained. "Standard procedure when there's suspicious activity on a flagged account. Multiple declined transactions in quick succession triggered their fraud protocols. Maya's also been calling the bank directly, claiming there's been some mistake, demanding to speak to someone who can fix this computer error immediately." Computer error. Even in crisis, Maya couldn't acknowledge the possibility that her access to my money might have been deliberately revoked. The idea that I might have agency in my own financial life was apparently so foreign to her that technical malfunction seemed more plausible than parental backbone. "They referred her to the fraud department," Rebecca added, and I could hear the grin in her voice, "where she's currently on hold, listening to elevator music and automated messages about protecting yourself from financial scams." The irony was so perfect it took my breath away. Maya, who had been systematically scamming me for 2 years, now trapped in a phone tree designed to help victims of financial fraud. If there was justice in the universe, it had a sense of humor, darker than I'd ever imagined. My phone buzzed with an incoming call, Maya's name appearing with her contact photo, a selfie from last Christmas where she's hugging me, both of us smiling with what I'd thought was genuine affection, but now recognized as performance art. I let it ring through to voicemail, the sound strangely satisfying in its futility. "Papa, something's wrong with your credit card," her voice said when I played the message later, the tone managing to be simultaneously panicked and accusatory. "It's not working anywhere, and the bank is giving me the runaround about some kind of security hold. Can you call them right away? There must be some computer error or system glitch. I'm stuck at the boutique, and this is really embarrassing. Everyone's staring at me like I'm some kind of, well, like I can't pay for things. You know how important appearances are, especially when Derek's friends might see me here." Even in crisis, Maya's primary concern was appearances, the social humiliation of being seen as someone who couldn't afford her lifestyle. Not the impact of her theft on me, not the betrayal of trust, not the years of lies, just her embarrassment at being publicly revealed as financially dependent on someone else. The calls continued throughout the afternoon, each voicemail a progression through the stages of grief played out in real time. Denial came first. "This has to be a mistake. You would never cut me off without talking to me first. We're family." Then anger. "You're punishing me for what exactly? For being successful? For having nice things? For not settling for the kind of small, limited life you chose? This is vindictive and cruel, Papa, and it's not like you." Bargaining followed quickly. "If this is about the necklace, I can explain everything. Victoria needed something special for her charity gala, and I thought you'd understand the importance of family obligations. We can work this out like adults. Just call me back and we'll fix whatever's wrong." Depression crept into her voice by evening. "You're destroying our family over money, Papa. Is that who you want to be? The kind of father who abandons his daughter when she needs him most? I thought I meant more to you than numbers on a bank statement." But she never reached acceptance. Not once in the 17 voicemails she left that day did she say the words I needed to hear. "I lied to you. I stole from you. I'm sorry." Instead, each message was another attempt to manipulate me back into the familiar pattern of her taking and me giving, her demanding and me capitulating. That evening, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea that had gone cold hours ago. The grandfather clock's ticking no longer ominous but rhythmic, soothing, like a heartbeat that had finally found its natural rhythm. Maya's final voicemail of the day played through my phone's speaker, her voice raw and desperate. "Papa, I know you're listening to these. I know you're choosing not to answer, and that terrifies me more than anything else that's happened today. You've never shut me out like this, never ignored me when I needed you. After Mom left, you were everything to me. Father, mother, best friend, protector. I know I've made mistakes, but cutting me off financially isn't going to fix anything. It's just going to destroy what we have left." She paused, and I could hear her crying. The sound that had once moved mountains for her but now fell on ears that had learned the difference between genuine remorse and manipulative performance. "Please, Papa. I don't know how to live without knowing you're there for me. You're all I have. The only person who's never given up on me, never walked away. Don't let money come between us. Don't let this be how our story ends. I'm begging you, call me back. Let me explain. Let me make this right." I saved the voicemail, not out of sentimentality, but as evidence. Even in her most vulnerable moment, Maya had managed to avoid taking responsibility, to make herself the victim of my cruelty, to frame her theft as a minor misunderstanding that could be resolved if I would just be reasonable. She'd learned nothing, understood nothing, changed nothing. The grandfather clock chimed 9 times, each note clear and purposeful, marking the end of one day and the beginning of whatever came next. Time wasn't my enemy anymore. It was my ally, carrying me away from the man I'd been and toward the man I was becoming. Victoria Blackwood's mansion sat in Lincoln Park like a monument to inherited privilege, its Georgian architecture imposing and immaculate, every detail designed to announce the family's wealth and social standing to anyone who cared to notice. I'd never been inside. Maya always made excuses about why I wasn't invited to Derek's family gatherings, always had reasons why I wouldn't fit in with their crowd. But now I understood why. I represented everything they weren't. Working-class origins, financial struggle, the kind of rough edges that couldn't be polished away with money and education. Rebecca and I approached the front door together, our footsteps echoing on the marble walkway that probably cost more than my car. In my jacket pocket, printed emails from Cartier confirmed what I already knew. The necklace Victoria wore in Maya's Instagram post had been purchased with my credit card on March 15th for exactly $22,947.99, including tax and express delivery. The door opened before we could knock, as if we were expected. Victoria herself stood there, still elegant at 65, her silver hair arranged in a style that suggested a standing appointment with Chicago's most expensive salon. Her expression shifted from polite confusion to growing concern as she recognized my face from Maya's wedding photos. Around her neck, catching the afternoon light like a beacon of betrayal, was the diamond necklace that had cost me a year's worth of careful saving. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice carrying the refined accent of someone who'd attended Swiss finishing schools and never worried about student loans. "Is everything all right? Maya didn't mention you were coming by." Of course she hadn't. Maya's compartmentalization of her life was surgical in its precision. Keep Papa in his box, Derek's family in theirs, never let them mix enough to compare stories or discover inconsistencies in her carefully constructed narratives. "Mrs. Blackwood," I said, noting how she flinched at my use of her last name instead of the informal Victoria she'd always insisted on during our brief previous encounters. "This is my attorney, Rebecca Martinez. We need to discuss that beautiful necklace you're wearing." The color drained from Victoria's face like water from a broken dam, but to her credit, she stepped aside and invited us in without attempting to deny or deflect. The foyer was a cathedral of marble and crystal, designed to intimidate and impress, every surface gleaming with the kind of cleanliness that required a full-time staff to maintain. Family portraits lined the walls in expensive frames, Derek through the years, his achievements and milestones documented in professional photography. Conspicuously absent from this gallery of family pride, any photos that included Maya or me, We were, it seemed, the relatives they acknowledged in private, but didn't display in public. We settled in a sitting room that looked like a museum exhibit, all antique furniture and carefully arranged objets d'art. Victoria perched on the edge of a Queen Anne chair that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Her hand rose unconsciously to touch the necklace, the gesture protective, guilty, telling. "I assume this is about Maya," Victoria said, her voice smaller now, less assured than the confident hostess who'd answered the door. "Derek mentioned there was some family tension recently." "Family tension," Rebecca repeated, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "Is that what you call fraud, Mrs. Blackwood?" Victoria's eyes widened, her hand dropping to her lap as if the necklace had suddenly become too heavy to bear. "I don't understand what fraud. What?" I leaned forward, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging in my chest. "That necklace was purchased with my credit card, Victoria, without my knowledge or consent. Maya told me the money was for Derek's medical emergency, some experimental treatment that insurance wouldn't cover. She said if we didn't act immediately, he could die." The silence that followed was profound, filled only by the ticking of what sounded like a dozen expensive clocks scattered throughout the room. Victoria's breathing became shallow, rapid, her composed facade cracking like ice in spring. "She said it was a gift," Victoria whispered, her voice breaking with what sounded like genuine horror. "From both of you, to thank me for welcoming her into our family, for treating her like the daughter I never had." Her voice cracked completely on those last words, and I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the gas station socks, the humiliation of sitting in my own living room receiving a $14 gift from someone who'd spent $23,000 of my dollars on jewelry for someone else. The sympathy died as quickly as it had been born. "Maya has never bought me a gift worth more than $15, I said, my voice low and controlled. "But she spent nearly $23,000 of my money on you. Money I gave her believing Derek was dying, believing she was desperate to save the man she loved." Victoria's face crumpled completely, tears streaming down her cheeks as she fumbled with the necklace's clasp with shaking hands. "Oh God. Oh God, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. If I had known the truth, if I had suspected for even a moment that she was lying to you." She held the jewelry out to me like it was burning her skin, like physical contact with it was causing her pain. "Please take it back. I never would have accepted it if I'd known what it cost you. Not the money, but the betrayal. The lies she had to tell to get it." I looked at the necklace. Stunning, expensive, meaningless now that I understood what it represented, and felt nothing but pity for everyone involved. Victoria had been played just as thoroughly as I had, used as a prop in Maya's theater of manipulation, reduced to an unwitting accomplice in my daughter's systematic theft. "Keep it," I said, standing to leave. The words surprised even me, but they felt right, necessary, final. Victoria looked up at me with confusion replacing the guilt in her eyes. "But I can't. I won't." Not knowing what I know now. "Keep it," I repeated, my voice firm. "But every time you look in the mirror wearing it, remember what it cost. Not just the $23,000, my trust in my daughter, my faith in family, my belief that love meant something more than access to a bank account. That's what you're wearing around your neck, Victoria. That's what my daughter sold to buy your approval." As we walked back to the car, Rebecca squeezed my shoulder, her touch gentle but grounding. "That was harsh," she said, "but fair. Probably more fair than she deserved." I looked back at the mansion one last time, seeing Victoria through the front window, still holding the necklace, still crying. "Maya didn't just steal my money," I said. "She destroyed the possibility of genuine family connections for everyone she touched. Victoria will never look at that necklace without remembering that it was bought with lies. Derek will never trust his wife's gifts again. Their whole family has been contaminated by my daughter's greed." The grandfather clock's ticking seemed to follow me even here, counting down not to some future disaster, but toward a reckoning that was long overdue. Maya had wanted to buy her way into Victoria's good graces, but all she'd accomplished was poisoning every relationship she'd tried to manipulate. The coffee shop buzzed with morning energy, the sound of espresso machines and casual conversation creating a barrier of normalcy around Rebecca and me as we planned the next phase of our campaign. I'd spent the night staring at the ceiling, Maya's desperate voicemails echoing in my mind like prayers to a god who'd finally stopped listening. 23 calls in the past 12 hours. 23 attempts to reach through the silence I'd built around myself, to find some crack in my resolve that she could exploit with the right combination of tears and manipulation. But I wasn't the same man who'd wired $20,000 in the middle of the night based on nothing but his daughter's tears. That man was gone, replaced by someone harder, someone who'd learned that love without boundaries wasn't love at all. It was enablement. "The necklace is just the tip of the iceberg," Rebecca said, sliding a thick folder across the table with the gravity of someone presenting evidence at a murder trial. "I had my forensic accountant work through the night analyzing your statements. Maya's been systematically draining your accounts for 2 years, but the pattern is even more sophisticated than we initially thought." I opened the folder with hands that had stopped trembling, seeing my financial life dissected and analyzed like evidence at a crime scene. Highlighted charges told a story of deception so thorough, so carefully planned, that it took my breath away. Each entry was cross-referenced with Maya's social media posts, with Derek's family events, with purchases that revealed the true scope of their lifestyle funded entirely by my stolen money. Derek's business investment in January, $15,000, had actually funded a week-long ski trip to Aspen, documented in Instagram posts that showed Maya in designer ski wear I'd unknowingly purchased. Emergency dental work in February, $8,000, had covered Derek's new golf clubs and country club membership fees. Car repairs in April, $12,000, had paid for Maya's designer handbag collection, each purse photographed and hashtagged with brands I couldn't pronounce but had apparently been buying for months. The pattern was breathtaking in its audacity and heartbreaking in its calculation. Maya hadn't been impulsively spending my money. She'd been running a long-term con, using my parental love as collateral for a lifestyle neither she nor Derek could afford on their actual incomes. "The total is even worse than we initially calculated," Rebecca said, her voice gentle but relentless in its honesty. $147,000 over 24 months. That's not just a daughter with expensive taste. That's systematic financial abuse conducted with the precision of a professional criminal enterprise. $147,000. The number hit me like a physical blow, leaving me dizzy and nauseous. More than my annual salary. More than I'd managed to save in the first 15 years of my working life. More than my parents had earned in some years when I was growing up, when we'd counted every penny and considered a dinner at McDonald's a special occasion. Gone. Converted into Instagram posts and social status and the approval of people who would never know what it had cost me to fund their entertainment. "This is criminal fraud," Rebecca continued, her finger tracing the timeline of Maya's deception. "Not family drama, not poor judgment, not a misunderstanding that can be resolved with a heart-to-heart conversation. We're talking about federal charges, potentially significant prison time, and civil liability that could follow her for the rest of her life. Prison." Maya in an orange jumpsuit, her perfect manicure chipped, her entitled smile finally wiped away by steel bars and concrete walls. The image should have horrified me, should have triggered every protective instinct I'd developed during her childhood. Instead, I felt something cold and satisfied settling in my chest, a sense that the universe might finally be restored to some kind of balance. "The pattern shows escalation, sophistication, and most damaging of all, premeditation," Rebecca said, pulling out a timeline that looked like evidence for a prosecution case. "Maya didn't stumble into stealing from you. She developed a system for it, refined it over time, and expanded it as she realized you weren't going to question her stories." She pointed to specific entries on the timeline, her voice taking on the rhythm of someone building a legal argument. "Look at this progression. The first few emergencies were small, 500 here, 1,000 there. Classic testing behavior. She was seeing how much she could take without triggering suspicion or pushback. Once she realized you would wire money immediately based on nothing but emotional manipulation, the amounts jumped dramatically. The stories became more elaborate, more urgent, more designed to prevent you from asking questions or demanding verification. I studied the timeline, seeing my own victimization laid out in clinical detail. Each transfer represented a moment when I'd chosen trust over skepticism, love over self-protection, faith in my daughter over faith in my own judgment. The man who'd made those transfers seemed like a stranger to me now, someone naive and desperate to be needed that he'd ignored every red flag Maya had planted. "What would you recommend?" I asked, though I already knew what I wanted to hear. Rebecca leaned back, her expression serious but determined. "Normally, I'd say prosecute to the fullest extent of the law, but this is your daughter, and I need you to understand what that means, not just for her, but for you. Criminal charges mean public records, media attention, neighbors and co-workers knowing that your own daughter systematically stole from you for years." She paused, studying my face for signs of wavering. "Are you prepared for that level of exposure? For the shame and embarrassment of having your family's dysfunction become public knowledge?" The shame angle. Of course. Maya had been counting on that. My reluctance to expose our family's dirty secrets to the world, my desire to protect her reputation even at the cost of my own dignity. But shame was just another form of control, and I was done being controlled by anyone, including my own misplaced sense of propriety. "Let's do it," I said, my voice steady and clear. "All of it. Criminal charges, civil suit, full prosecution. I want her to face every consequence of what she's done, and I want everyone to know that stealing from your parents isn't a family matter. It's a crime." Rebecca smiled, and I realized she'd been testing me, waiting to see if I had the stomach for real justice, or if I'd settle for empty threats and meaningless gestures. "There's one more thing," she said, pulling out her phone. "Maya's been calling my office every hour since yesterday. She wants to meet, to explain everything, and work out a payment plan. She's scared, Paul. Really scared." Good. Fear was the first step toward respect, and Maya had never respected me as anything more than a source of funding. Fear meant she was finally beginning to understand that actions had consequences, that love had limits, that even the most patient father could reach a breaking point. "Set up the meeting," I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "But make it clear. This isn't a negotiation. It's her chance to face what she's done before the courts do it for her." My phone buzzed with yet another call from Maya. The 40 seconds since she'd discovered her access to my accounts had been terminated. I declined it without looking, the gesture now as automatic as breathing. Each ignored call was a small victory, proof that I was no longer at her emotional beck and call, no longer willing to drop everything to manage her crises and cater to her demands. The coffee shop's ambient noise seemed to fade as I imagined the conversation to come. Maya, probably rehearsing her performance in front of a mirror, choosing her outfit carefully to look vulnerable and contrite. Derek, coaching her on what to say to minimize the damage and shift blame. Victoria, perhaps, preparing to offer money to make this all go away so her family's reputation wouldn't be tarnished by association with a thief. But this wasn't about money anymore. This was about accountability, something Maya had never faced in her privileged life. The grandfather clock in my mind ticked toward a reckoning 28 years in the making, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I was looking forward to what came next. They arrived at Rebecca's office building 10 minutes early, Maya in a simple black dress that suggested mourning or penitence, Derek in his most expensive suit like armor against the consequences of his wife's crimes. I watched them through the conference room's glass wall, noting how Maya paced the hallway while Derek sat rigid on a bench, his jaw clenched with the tension of a man who'd built his entire lifestyle on stolen money and was now watching it collapse. Even in crisis, they couldn't present a united front. Maya's nervous energy and Derek's frozen panic revealed everything about their relationship. She was the active predator, He was the passive beneficiary, neither of them capable of taking genuine responsibility for what they'd done to me. When Rebecca led them into the conference room, Maya's eyes immediately found mine, searching desperately for the father who'd always melted at her distress, who'd always chosen her happiness over his own well-being. But that man was gone, replaced by someone harder, someone who'd learned the difference between love and enablement, between family loyalty and self-destruction. "Papa," she breathed, her voice breaking on the word like glass hitting concrete. "Thank God you agreed to see me. I was so scared that you'd given up on me completely, that I'd lost you forever." I remained seated, my hands folded on the conference table, my expression neutral as stone. The silence stretched until Derek shifted uncomfortably, and Maya's eyes filled with tears that had once moved mountains for her, but now fell on ground that had learned not to yield. The room felt smaller with all of us in it, the air thick with tension and unspoken accusations. Legal documents were spread across the table like evidence at a trial, each paper representing another charge that could send Maya to prison, another consequence she'd never imagined she'd have to face. Rebecca took control with the authority of someone who'd orchestrated these conversations before, her voice professional and cold. "My client is prepared to file criminal charges for fraud in the amount of $147,000. We have comprehensive documentation, bank records, witness testimony, and a clear pattern of systematic theft spanning 2 years. She gestured to the stack of evidence. "Before we proceed with formal charges, Mr. Thompson wanted to give you an opportunity to explain your actions. Consider this your one chance to take responsibility for what you've done." Maya's composure cracked completely, tears streaming down her cheeks as she reached across the table toward me with trembling hands. "Papa, I never meant for it to go this far. I never wanted to hurt you. I was scared, trapped by expectations I couldn't meet, trying to fit into a world where I didn't belong." The words came in a rush, practiced but desperate. "Derek's family has these standards, these assumptions about who we are and what we can afford. I felt like I was drowning in their judgment, in their quiet disapproval of my background, my family, my everything. So you stole from me," I said, my voice steady and cold. The words landed like stones dropped into still water, sending ripples of shock across Maya's face. "It wasn't stealing." Maya's voice rose, desperation making her reckless, revealing the twisted logic she'd used to justify years of theft. "It was family money. You always said everything you had was for me, that my happiness was all that mattered. You raised me to believe that your resources were mine, that supporting me was your purpose in life." And there it was. The poisonous foundation of our relationship laid bare. My unconditional love had become, in her mind, unconditional access to my bank account. Every sacrifice I'd made to ensure her security had taught her that my resources existed solely for her benefit. Every time I'd chosen her needs over my own wants, I'd reinforced the lesson that my value as a father was measured by my willingness to fund her lifestyle. "I said my love was unconditional," I replied, my voice carrying the weight of 28 years of misguided devotion. "Not my wallet. I said I'd always be there for you, not that I'd always pay for you." Derek finally spoke, his voice tight with controlled panic and barely concealed anger. "Look, Paul, we can fix this. We'll pay you back every penny, with interest. Maya just got caught up in trying to impress my family, trying to prove she belonged in our world. You know how mothers-in-law can be, especially someone like Victoria, who's used to a certain standard of living." The casual way he threw Victoria under the bus after Maya had spent my money to buy his mother's approval revealed everything about their character. They were willing to sacrifice anyone, me, Victoria, each other, to save themselves from the consequences of their actions. "How?" I asked, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. "You don't have jobs that would support paying back $147,000. Maya works part-time at a marketing firm making barely above minimum wage, and Derek, what exactly is it you do for a living?" Derek's face flushed red, his composure crumbling under the weight of direct questioning. He'd been living off his trust fund and Maya's theft of my money, playing at being an entrepreneur while producing nothing of value, contributing nothing meaningful to the world beyond Instagram posts and restaurant reviews. The silence stretched until Maya spoke again, her voice small and calculating even in desperation. "We could sell the house," she said, though we both knew it was mortgaged beyond its value. Derek's car, which was leased. My jewelry, which had been purchased with my stolen money, making it technically my property already. "We'll liquidate everything if we have to," she continued, the offer sounding hollow even to her. "We'll move in with Derek's parents, get real jobs, live like normal people until we've paid back every cent." But even as she made the offer, I could see her mind working, calculating how to minimize the sacrifice, how to shift blame, how to manipulate me into accepting less than full restitution. She was negotiating, not apologizing, bargaining, not repenting. "The house is underwater," Rebecca interjected, consulting her notes with surgical precision. "Derek's car is leased and worth nothing. Most of Maya's jewelry and designer items were purchased with Mr. Thompson's money, making them his property under Illinois law." She looked up from her papers, her expression impassive. "You have no assets worth liquidating, no income stream capable of supporting meaningful restitution, and no realistic plan for repayment beyond vague promises and emotional manipulation." They had nothing. All their lifestyle, all their apparent success, all their social media presentations of wealth and happiness had been built on my stolen money. They were broke fraudsters living in a house of cards that was finally collapsing under the weight of truth. Maya looked at me with the same expression she'd worn as a child when caught in a lie, part defiance, part calculation, part desperate hope that Daddy would fix everything like he always had. But I wasn't her daddy anymore. I was her victim, and victims don't rescue their abusers. "Papa, please," she whispered, her voice carrying every manipulation technique she'd learned in 28 years of getting her way. "I know I've made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I'm still your little girl. Somewhere underneath all this mess, all these bad decisions, I'm still the daughter who loves you more than anyone else in the world." She leaned forward, her eyes locked on mine. "Don't let money destroy what we have. Don't let these lawyers and legal documents come between us. We're family, Papa. That has to mean something more than bank statements and credit card bills." I stood up slowly, my decision crystallizing into something unbreakable, final, liberating. The words that came next surprised even me with their clarity, their finality, their complete absence of doubt. "No," I said, my voice steady as bedrock. "You're not my little girl anymore. You're a thief who happens to share my DNA. You're a criminal who learned to weaponize my love against me. You're a stranger who stole not just my money, but my faith in family, my trust in the person I raised, my belief that love means something more than access to a bank account." The words hit her like physical blows, each one landing with the force of years of suppressed anger and betrayal. For a moment, I saw not the manipulator but the abandoned child who'd been left by her mother, who'd learned to use guilt and emotional blackmail as survival tools. But that part of me, the part that wanted to comfort her, to make it all okay like I had 1,000 times before, had enabled this monster. It was time to let her face the consequences of her choices without my protection, without my intervention, without my money. "File the charges," I told Rebecca, not taking my eyes off Maya's face. "All of them. Criminal fraud, elder abuse, theft, everything we discussed. I want her to face the full weight of what she's done." Maya's scream followed me out of the conference room, a sound of pure anguish that would have once brought me running with checkbook in hand. Now it was just noise, the death cry of a relationship that had been built on lies and exploitation from the very beginning. The grandfather clock in my mind ticked on, measuring not loss but liberation, not ending but beginning, not punishment but justice finally, inevitably, deservedly served. 6 months later, I sat in my garden watching the sunrise paint the Chicago sky in shades of redemption, the autumn air crisp with the promise of new beginnings. The house was quieter now, filled with a peace I hadn't known was possible after decades of being emotionally held hostage by someone else's crises and demands. The grandfather clock still ticked in the living room, but its rhythm no longer marked time stolen or wasted. It measured moments reclaimed, hours that belonged to me, days lived for my own purposes rather than someone else's agenda. Maya was serving 18 months in minimum security prison, Derek had moved back in with his parents after their divorce, and Victoria had quietly sold the necklace, donating the proceeds to an elder abuse charity in what I suspected was an attempt to assuage her guilt. My phone rang, interrupting the morning's tranquility. The number was unfamiliar, but something made me answer anyway.
Papa?
Maya's voice was different, smaller, stripped of its practiced manipulation, raw with something that might have been genuine emotion. They said I could make one call this week, and I wanted it to be to you. I'd wondered if this moment would come, if prison had changed her or just taught her new tactics for getting what she wanted. The old me would have felt my heart racing at the sound of her voice, would have been flooded with protective instincts and desperate hope that we could somehow repair what she'd broken. But I felt only a distant curiosity, the way you might feel when encountering a stranger with a familiar face. "What do you want, Maya?" I asked, my voice neutral, neither cruel nor kind. I wanted to say I'm sorry. The words came out in a rush as if she'd been practicing them. Really, truly sorry. Not the fake sorry from before, not the manipulative sorry I used to use to get what I wanted. I've had time to think, really think, about what I did to you, to us, to everything we used to have. She paused, gathering strength or perhaps just breath. I know you probably don't believe me. I know I've said sorry before and not meant it, not really. But this place, being here, losing everything, watching Derek walk away the moment things got difficult, it's given me perspective I never wanted, but apparently needed. I don't believe you, I said, but without anger, without the bitter satisfaction I might have expected to feel. Trust isn't something you rebuild with words, Maya. It's earned through actions, through consistency, through proving over time that you've actually changed. I know, she said, her voice breaking slightly. I know, and I'm not calling to ask for forgiveness or money or even a relationship. I don't deserve any of those things, and I'm finally smart enough to know it. This was new. Maya acknowledging that she didn't deserve something, admitting that her wants and needs weren't automatically my responsibility to fulfill. It was such a departure from the daughter I'd known that I almost wondered if I was talking to the wrong person. I'm calling because I remember, she continued, her voice growing stronger, more honest than I'd heard it in years. I remember being your little girl, before I became this person I don't even recognize. I remember you teaching me to ride a bike in the park, staying up all night reading me stories when I couldn't sleep, holding me when I cried about kids at school being mean to me. Her voice broke completely then, and for the first time in our conversation, the emotion sounded real, rather than performed. I remember you working double shifts so I could have the same clothes as the other kids, selling your motorcycle to pay for my prom dress, giving up that trip to Italy you'd dreamed about since I was little just so you could pay for my wedding. These weren't things she'd ever acknowledged before, sacrifices she'd taken for granted or simply ignored in her calculations of what she was owed. Hearing her finally recognize them felt like a small miracle, though I was careful not to let hope take root too quickly. That man deserved so much better than what I gave him, she said. He deserved a daughter who appreciated his sacrifices instead of seeing them as evidence that she could take more. He deserved honesty instead of lies, gratitude instead of entitlement, love instead of exploitation. I sat in my garden listening to words I'd waited years to hear and felt something complex and painful stirring in my chest. Not forgiveness, that would take much longer, if it ever came at all, but perhaps the beginning of something like peace. You're right, I said simply. He did deserve better. When I get out, Maya said, her voice steady now, resolved, I don't expect anything from you. I don't expect forgiveness or money or visits or even acknowledgement if you see me on the street. I've lost the right to expect anything from you, and I finally understand that. She paused again, and I could hear prison sounds in the background. Doors clanging, voices calling, the institutional noise of a place designed to contain people who'd lost their freedom through their own choices. "I just wanted you to know that somewhere in here," she said, "your real daughter still exists. She's ashamed of what she became, horrified by what she did to the person who loved her most in the world. She knows she destroyed something beautiful and irreplaceable, and she's going to have to live with that for the rest of her life." After she hung up, I sat in the garden for a long time, listening to the sounds of a world moving forward without the drama and chaos that had defined my relationship with Maya for so many years. The grandfather clock chimed inside the house, marking another hour of a life I was finally living for myself. I thought about the Father's Day socks and still in my drawer upstairs, kept now not as a symbol of betrayal, but as a reminder of what I'd survived, what I'd overcome, what I'd learned about the difference between love and enablement. Maya might find genuine redemption in prison, or she might just learn to be a more careful predator. Either way, it was no longer my responsibility to find out. The sun climbed higher, warming my face as I tended to the tomatoes I'd planted in spring, vegetables I'd grown for my own table, funded with my own money, enjoyed without the constant anxiety of wondering when the next crisis would drain my accounts. For the first time in decades, my garden felt like mine, not a resource to be liquidated for someone else's emergency, not an asset to be converted into cash for someone else's dreams. The seasons changed, and with them, so did I. Winter brought snow that I watched from my warm kitchen, drinking coffee that I'd bought without calculating whether I could afford it. Reading books I'd wanted to read for years but never had time for because I'd been too busy working extra shifts to fund Maya's lifestyle. Spring brought new growth in the garden and new friendships with neighbors I'd neglected during the years when Maya's dramas consumed all my emotional energy. I joined a book club, started volunteering at the local food bank, began taking Italian lessons. The trip to Italy I'd postponed for Maya's college, then her wedding, then her endless emergencies was finally becoming a possibility rather than a fantasy. Summer brought a letter from the prison, an official notification that Maya had been accepted into a vocational training program, learning skills that might actually allow her to support herself when she was released. I felt neither pride nor sadness at this news, just a distant hope that she might find a way to build a legitimate life for herself. And then fall arrived again, bringing with it the anniversary of that Father's Day that had changed everything. I spent the morning in my garden, harvesting the vegetables I'd grown myself, preparing a meal I would eat alone but with satisfaction rather than loneliness. The grandfather clock chimed noon as I sat down to lunch, its sound no longer a reminder of time wasted, but time well spent, time reclaimed, time that belonged to me and no one else. The house felt different now, not empty, but peaceful, not lonely, but serene, not like a prison, but like a sanctuary I'd built for myself through the simple act of refusing to be victimized any longer. My phone sat on the table, silent and unpressured. No desperate calls from Maya, no emergencies that required immediate financial solutions, no manipulative messages designed to make me feel guilty for having boundaries. The silence was golden, precious, worth more than any gift Maya had ever pretended to give me. I thought about the man I'd been a year ago, broken, defeated, systematically drained by someone who'd learned to weaponize his love against him. That man seemed like a stranger now, someone I pitied but no longer resembled. The transformation hadn't been easy or quick, but it had been complete. I'd learned that love without boundaries wasn't love at all, that family obligations had limits, that being a good father sometimes meant refusing to enable bad behavior. The Italian cookbook I'd bought sat open beside my plate, filled with recipes for meals I would cook for myself, trips I would take by myself, dreams I would pursue for myself. The money Maya had stolen was gone forever, but the freedom I'd gained by cutting her off was priceless. Every dollar I spent now was mine to spend, every decision mine to make, every day mine to live according to my own values and priorities. That evening, As I sat on my front porch watching the neighborhood settle into night, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. Maya's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been liberating in ways I never could have imagined. By forcing me to choose between enabling her theft and protecting myself, she'd inadvertently given me the greatest gift of all, my own life back. The grandfather clock chimed inside the house, marking another hour of time that belonged to me, another moment of a life lived on my own terms. I smiled, closed my eyes, and listened to the peaceful sounds of a world that was no longer defined by someone else's crises, someone else's demands, someone else's endless capacity to take without giving. For the first time in decades, I was exactly where I belonged, free from the exhausting work of loving someone who saw love as weakness, generosity as stupidity, and family as a con game to be won. Time was no longer my enemy. It was my gift, and I was finally old enough, wise enough, and strong enough to know how to use it. The postcards from Italy were beautiful, the Colosseum at sunset, the canals of Venice reflecting ancient palaces, the rolling hills of Tuscany painted in gold and green. I sent them to myself, a silly indulgence that made me smile every time I dropped one in the mail from whatever city I was exploring. The trip I'd dreamed of for 30 years was everything I'd imagined, and more. Walking through Rome without checking my phone every 5 minutes for crisis calls from Maya. Eating dinner in Florence without calculating whether the cost would leave me short for her next emergency. Standing in the Sistine Chapel without the weight of someone else's problems pressing down on my shoulders like a physical burden. I was sitting in a cafe in the Piazza San Marco, watching pigeons compete with tourists for breadcrumbs, when my phone rang. Rebecca's name appeared on the screen, which was unusual. We'd stayed in touch after Maya's case was resolved, but she rarely called while I was traveling. "Paul," she said without preamble, "I wanted to give you an update. Maya was released yesterday." I felt nothing. No anxiety, no hope, no fear, no anger. Just the mild interest you might feel when hearing news about a distant acquaintance. "How do you know?" "She called my office, not to ask for anything," Rebecca added quickly, "but to thank me. Said the legal consequences had been exactly what she needed, that prison had given her time to understand what she'd done and why she'd done it." "Did she ask about me?" "No," Rebecca said, and I could hear approval in her voice. "She specifically said she wasn't going to contact you, that she understood she'd lost the right to have you in her life. She wanted me to tell you that she'd found a job and an apartment, that she was building a life based on her own work rather than other people's money." I sipped my espresso, watching gondoliers navigate the busy canal, and considered this news. Maya, taking responsibility for herself. Maya, not asking for money or rescue or forgiveness. Maya, finally learning to live within her own means rather than mine. It was what I'd hoped for but never expected to see. "That's good," I said, meaning it. "I hope she can maintain it." "There's something else," Rebecca said. "She wanted you to know that she's been attending meetings, Gamblers Anonymous, but adapted for people with spending addictions. She's been working with a therapist who specializes in financial abuse cases, trying to understand how she became someone who could steal from her own father. This was more than I'd dared hope for, not just behavior change, but an attempt to understand and address the underlying pathology that had made the behavior possible in the first place. She said to tell you that she knows sorry isn't enough, that words can't undo what she did, but that she's committed to becoming someone who could never do those things again," Rebecca continued. "Someone who deserves to be called your daughter, even if she never gets that chance." After we hung up, I sat in the Venice sunshine, thinking about redemption and forgiveness, and the difference between the two. Maya might genuinely change, might become someone capable of healthy relationships and honest living. That would be good for her, good for the world, good for anyone who chose to trust her with their heart or their resources. But it didn't change what she'd done to me, didn't restore the years of my life she'd consumed with her lies and manipulation. didn't give me back the dreams she'd stolen, or the trust she'd shattered. Forgiveness, I'd learned, wasn't something I owed her just because she'd finally decided to grow up. It was something I might choose to give, if and when it served my own healing, not hers. The grandfather clock in my mind ticked peacefully as I finished my coffee and prepared to continue exploring this ancient, beautiful city. I had a life to live. Not the life I'd planned when Maya was small, and I'd dreamed of growing old with a daughter who loved me as much as I loved her, but a good life nonetheless. A life built on my own choices, funded by my own work, filled with my own interests and friendships and adventures. That evening, as I watched the sunset paint the Grand Canal in shades of rose and gold, I thought about the Father's Day that had started it all. The gas station socks were still in my drawer back home, a reminder not of betrayal, but of survival, not of what I'd lost, but of what I'd found. Myself, finally. After decades of being someone else's solution to every problem, someone else's source of endless funding, someone else's parent, instead of my own person. Maya might be redeemed. She might build a genuine life based on honesty and hard work and respect for other people's boundaries. I hope she would, not for my sake but for hers. Not because I needed her to change, but because everyone deserved the chance to become better than their worst moments. But redeemed or not, changed or not, sorry or not, she would have to live with the consequences of what she'd done. And I would live with the gifts those consequences had given me. Freedom from manipulation, peace from drama, and the hard-won knowledge that love without limits isn't love at all. It's a recipe for mutual destruction disguised as virtue. The Italian sunset faded into twilight, and I smiled as I walked back to my hotel through narrow streets that had witnessed centuries of human folly and redemption. Time moved forward, inexorable and fair, carrying us all toward whatever futures we were brave enough to build for ourselves. I was finally, completely, joyfully building mine. If this story of courage and self-recovery moved you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share in the comments below. Have you ever had to choose between enabling someone you love and protecting yourself? What did you learn from that experience? Your stories matter and might help someone else find the strength to set necessary boundaries.